From the movie American Sniper to the serious scrutiny of the VA, veterans' health issues have fueled headlines and our imagination. We all know the cost of serving in war is high, and that men and women deployed overseas come home to an uphill battle finding the care that they need. Our next guests think about this all the time. I'm so pleased to introduce the Division Administrator for Team Rubicon, Mike Monroe. To describe Team Rubicon, they send vets to disaster relief areas around the world. We have an ethicist and a professor of philosophy at Georgetown University and author of the forthcoming book, Afterwar, Nancy Sherman, and CEO and co-founder of the Carson J. Spencer Foundation, Sally Spencer Thomas. Carson Spencer Foundation does suicide awareness and prevention and works to destigmatize depression. Here again to lead the conversation is Atlantic's Washington editor-at-large, Steve Clemons.
Great. Everybody feeling good? Good to see you again. It's been so long. No, it's been fun. And we have had a bit of time. Mike, it's great to see you because we hadn't yet had a chance to meet. But I guess, in this arena of thinking about veterans, mental health, dealing with platforms to deal with that, I want to start in an uncomfortable area that I had raised with Senator Debbie Stabenow in a forum yesterday, and just ask just up front, is it a cheap way into the mental health discussion to only think about it through veterans that are returning? Or is that leverage to get society to think more broadly about the mental health question and how to make the whole question? Or is the veterans picture just a completely different dimension? And I want to start with you in dealing with, because as I was having this discussion, we were thinking about these issues. We all know veterans that have problems, but there are also broader problems in society, and it makes me interesting of not wanting to trivialize one part of the equation while we're sort of raising and elevating something, for those people who have fought for the country.
Okay, that was a great question, well presented, deserves an answer. I was a Marine infantry guy, and I need you to pare that down into, right. Can you give me, I kind of jumped around in there, and I want to make sure I know exactly.
So we're talking about vets today and mental health. Right. But there are a lot of mental health problems in society. Okay. And so the question is, a lot of us are paying attention to this now because Bradley Cooper started in a movie, and it's hot. Okay. And when people forget that movie, maybe it won't be hot. But there are a lot of embedded mental health problems in society in general. So you were at that thing yesterday, Nancy, and I'm just sort of interested in whether or not we're sensationalizing a part of the question that takes us away from the broader problem. Does that make sense?
I'm happy to jump in.
Yeah.
Vets typically do get marginalized in a really interesting way. That's a 0.5%. Longest wars, 2.7 million coming home, large number, but still small. I don't think we're leveraging it. In fact, I think it's hard to get treatment, and it's still hard to get access. The mental health issue, though, is a national epidemic. It's not just that. Right. And we shouldn't actually isolate it. If you try to go to get a shrink or any kind of mental health clinician and you show them TRICARE, which is a lot of people are very proud to have because it's the largest, and they have a full disability package, they're not going to see anyone who sees private and doesn't do insurance because it's Medicaid level. And so that affects everyone who is at that level and using insurance. So I think it's a larger issue. It shouldn't be the only one. And I do think, I'm with you totally. If you trivialize war in the sense of war hero talk and some of the groups that advertise that really do play up the nobility, that plays into a bad narrative for the soldiers, Marines, sailors, Air Force men and women, as well as for society. They don't need more black and white morality. They need a lot of gray.
Sally, you had a brother that you had a deep personal connection with this. Yeah. What are your thoughts?
Oh, I'm interested in this from a number of perspectives. As a psychologist and also someone who worked in the VA, I had a calling for it, and then my younger brother took his life 10 years ago. And even with all that training and experience, I learned so much about the fact that suicide...
Was your brother a veteran?
He was not. My husband is, and so I'm connected in that way. But what we learned in the aftermath of that is that suicide tends to take a very specific subgroup of people. Majority of them are white, working-aged men, and they're what we call double jeopardy men. And so that became a big gap for us to look on how we could fill that, how we could address that. So a lot of our male veterans fit into that. The double jeopardy means they have a number of risk factors, substance abuse, risk-taking, recklessness, depression sometimes, and they're also a group least likely to seek help on their own. So from birth, they're conditioned. Don't ever show weakness, don't ever ask for help, don't admit any kind of illness or injury or anything. You got to tough it up and solve your own problems. And so after a year and a half of research and development, asking men who had survived their own suicide attempts, what would have helped you, they told us humor. So it wasn't access to mental health resources that was the problem. It was a branding issue. So much of our messaging around mental health was, if you're depressed, get help. Well, that was missing them on 2 levels. They said, if you make it funny and engage me on a different level, bring down those social barriers of stigma and engage my brain and my social world in a different way, I'll pay attention.
So what kind of humor? Bar humor?
Yeah, dark, cynical, black humor. And so, against the, or I guess to the shock of the mental health community, we created a fictional therapist called Dr. Rich Mahogany, who's manning up mental health by using humor. And if I could just show a brief clip.
Yeah, sure.
So our goal is to bring men in and then get them to take an 18-point head inspection to show different levels of how bad is it for depression, anxiety, substance abuse, and anger. And they meet this fake doctor called Rich Mahogany, and this is how he leads them.
And so they really meet this guy?
Well, in the world of
video
cyberspace.
Form, yeah, okay. And we have him here? Oh.
Welcome to your appointment. Please, take a knee. Make yourself comfortable. Now, to help me better recommend manly tips, activities, and resources for you to explore in my office, I'm going to ask you to fill out a questionnaire about yourself, your feelings, and your life. After you finish, I will use my patented man therapy calculator to evaluate your answers and provide you with some suggestions. Oh, and don't bullshit me. There's nothing I hate more than bullshit. Except for maybe shopping malls and spandex.
So the men come into this virtual
and
office.
that works?
That works. So you're only seeing one tiny small snippet of this. But
is there like a website of these things?
They get to explore different resources. We can direct them to veteran-specific resources. Right. There's a whole testimonial library of real men talking about their stories of hope and recovery. And then what we found through our evaluation is, yes, it works. We're attracting the men who are not showing up in mental health centers. They are staying and exploring the website for a very long time. And then they're getting triaged. If they're looking pretty mentally resilient from that screening tool, we send them to self-help or peer help tools. If they have some more significant things going on, we can actually link them to people who are veteran-specific mental health resources or specialize in men's issues or specialize in certain issues they're struggling with. And if they're in crisis in that moment, we connect them immediately to the Veterans Crisis Line or Veterans Chat. And so we can track, of all the funnel of coming in from the top, how people are navigating the website and how they're ending up in these different resources.
Mike, you help people find purpose after having had purpose, great purpose. Tell us a little bit about what you do in the communities you build.
So Team Rubicon is a disaster relief organization, and we use primarily veterans as our volunteers. We have about 24,000 volunteers at this time. We're organized into 5 regions. I have the eastern half of the United States. So we're giving the veteran or members of Team Rubicon, we're giving them a sense of purpose in they go into a neighborhood or they go into a town or they're responding to a disaster. So they get that feeling of giving back. But the other piece...
so is it like a reserve?
You mean like a reserve?
Well, I mean, in the sense you've got 2.7 million veterans that have come back. Many of these people go into kind of the National Guard. This is sort of a private side reserve, right? A reserve guard.
Yeah, so I mean,
for doing good.
Army Corps Reserve.
It's a little bit of that, and then we engage them in the community. So if you're not deployed, you've got you're in Region 3 and you're out of around Philadelphia. What are you doing? Well, the team's coming together and doing things like everything from just a general social, maybe some fitness stuff, to maybe helping a veteran rebuild their house over a weekend, so service projects. But we're also training them. We're starting to provide more and more training for when they deploy. Everything from how to use a chainsaw, to how to tarp a house, to how to muck out a basement from a flood. And to your point, one of the things around the humor that we found is you go on a deployment, and at the end of the day, we kind of just huddle up. And what we see is some of that humor, some of that just barroom talk, And we see a lot of healing happening there. A lot of, that's when the tears start. That's when, and I'll probably get emotional talking about it because I've been there. You just see these people opening up, and that camaraderie of being back with people who they may have served with or are like-minded is very, very powerful, and we've seen a lot of good come from that.
Steve, something I just want to raise is we often think about service persons as men, but of course they're women.
Yeah.
And they often have more invisible than the invisible wounds, in part because of broken military justice system, which has been exposed so well the past few years, and there are bills currently in front of Congress on this issue. And also because sometimes the humor doesn't get to them. They have to outbro the bro is how I hear them talking about it. And that often, when they try, they sometimes, terrible language comes up. Like you're breaking the honor system. You're trying to get into it. You're trying to bring down or corrupt an old honor system. The worst kind of sexism in a very patriarchal system. So we oughtn't to forget, sometimes women may need different kinds of help, and often it's a kind of double up. They are victims of sexual assault, harassment, but also members of the military for whom inside the wire is worse than outside the wire, or is bad. That's
and Nancy, you were profiling, it was very interesting, David Brooks' article, sort of about, if I can do fast forward, sort of morality, trauma, and the burdens of war, or something along those lines. And in it, he had this interesting line that there aren't many PTSD victims from natural disasters, that there's something about service, the commitment, the bigger cause that is attached, this moral purpose, if you will, that's attached to this trauma that people are trying to struggle with. And I'm interested, Mike, maybe you have an insight into this as well. Do people coming back feel as if they're not, is it that their sacrifice isn't understood? Is there a gap there that they're trying to fill that,
Sure.
Give us some insight into what you see with the people you're working with.
I think it's varied over the last couple of years. I think, there was the time when every newspaper you opened on the front page, there was something that reminded you of it. I think that communities, people didn't know really how to respond to veterans. They didn't know, some people didn't, should I say thank you? Like, does that feel weird? So I think that gap has gotten a little better. It's narrowed. I think people are understanding veterans and getting it more. I think that one of the things that I see is sometimes I think the veterans think it's all on the community to figure them out. And the veterans need to understand that, I know when I was in the military, sometimes you'd talk to someone and you'd hear them, excuse my language, and they'd be like, fucking civilians. And they need to realize that not everyone's effing civilian. Like, you're gonna go be a civilian when you get out.
And you're a citizen soldier.
And you're a part of the community. And as soon as you embrace, you take that step forward to embrace the community and the people in that community and the value that they can give you, it's gonna make it more seamless. So I've seen it vary over the years. I think that now, different movies come out and it spikes a little bit, and certain conversations come up, and then you'll see it go down and it'll go back up. And every veteran's different. Every veteran's story is different. And someone who maybe they never deployed, but they were in a truck accident, and to them, that is a traumatic thing. And just because you were in, again, excuse my Marine language, but if you were in the shit, and somebody else wasn't, like, everybody's situation is different, and the way they respond to, whether it's the kindness or the offer for treatment is different.
Can I just say something? I think David Brooks, part of what he was trying to get at is there are, PTSD is fear-based. It's a threat response, and you can have it to national disasters. Katrina, there were a lot of folks in tsunamis who have those sort of hyper-vigilant, hyper-arousal, flashback kind of responses. But war is often, and sometimes also other kinds of injuries, I talk about moral injury, where your psyche's bruised because was it the just war? The collateral killing was legal, permissible, but still feels awful, and you carry guilt, and you feel like you let down your standards of being a good Marine. Marines don't do that, or you can't bring your buddy home. Marines supposed to bring back their buddies home, pull the fallen comrade out of combat or out of the war zone. That's hard. It's hard to be zero defect proof, and the military kind of wants it of you often, or you want it of yourself. That's a kind of moral injury, and that does have purpose, high ideals, and the hurts to your ego, your sense of ideals are hard to talk about often, and but they're safe ground. Nonetheless, it's like a double edge. They're safe ground because you can talk about it in class, about just war ethics and the like. But also, it's dimensional. You may be on the side where it's suicidal guilt. And it does need to be treated.
Sally?
I just wanted to address your comment about women veterans. Obviously, we knew that there's women veterans. Our program is really specific on the double jeopardy men, of which warriors often fall into that category. And then to address your comment, too, I think when people hear about a suicidal person, they immediately think mental health services is the only answer. And what we're finding, especially, again, with these men who have been conditioned from birth not to ask for help, volunteering is one of the best things that we can get them to do, because a lot of women have no problems going to see a therapist, reaching out and that help. There's no sense of reciprocity that's needed. We do it, we're done with it, and we move on. For a lot of men, that idea of like taking a step down in the power hierarchy, asking for help because they're vulnerable, that needs to be repaid in some way, whether I return the favor in some symbolic form or in a direct way. That needs to happen, and so that can happen through volunteering. When we look at risks for suicide, there's two things that emerge over and over again. One is a sense of burdensomeness. I believe that my death is worth more to the people who love me than my life is. And the other is isolation. I've lost the people who are most important to me. And so when you're volunteering, especially in groups, you get both of those things back again. You get a sense of connection and you get a sense of purpose. And it's free often. It's something that we can easily engage people in to find sources of healing.
Let me ask you guys, again, I want to go to the audience in a moment, but just this is such an intriguing area. And you obviously have returning veterans that have performed services but lived through hell, lived through the shit, as you said. And just thinking at Gabrielle Glazer's provocative article in The Atlantic this month that said, Alcoholics Anonymous may work for some people, but it just doesn't for a lot, and it's not science-based. Is there more of a science-based framework, empirically designed with studies that's beginning to look at how these factors, like maybe what you're doing with the volunteering or the building of community, that there's actual feedback, studies, and proof of what we need to do to create a better structural environment for people that may be struggling with some of these issues? Because I have to tell you, as someone who's outside it, it sounds like to me that all of you know what you're doing, but it sounds very mushy. It sounds very fuzzy. It sounds very all over the place, in the sense that I'm not sure what the scientific method that actually helps take a person who's having trouble and turns them into a functioning member of society who won't kill himself or herself.
I'm going to take that on as the humanities professor here.
Right. Sloppy and...
No,
I'm just joking.
There's art, not everything is empirical science and not everything's healed. I sat on the suicide review board for the Vice Admiral of the Army, and they were looking for biomarkers in the brain that could predict when people might be suicidal or what a suicidal person might have, despite the fact that there are a lot of other kinds of evidence. So absolutely, NIMH runs tons of studies, bipolar, manic, schizophrenia, depression. Brain science is critical, and part of it. Also, the art of talking is critical. Your Marines come home, they come into my classroom, they don't want to talk at Georgetown, and they don't feel safe, and thank you for your service is a Vietnam holdover for, I used to say, up yours, but now I'm thanking you, and the resentment is on one side and the moral ambivalence on the other side. Did you really do a good thing when you went? Why'd you go? I wouldn't send my child. All of that is the masked, unspoken. So the art of going beyond thank you for your service, that's at best an icebreaker. If it is an icebreaker, it often isn't that, is critical. And that, I think, is an art of conversation. Zeke Emmanuel was talking earlier. We need to have a conversation about moral accountability. all the guilt I might feel for not sending my children to war, that there isn't a conscription. How do I feel about that? That my ROTC guys and women at Georgetown, they feel awkward the day they wear their uniform. There is no doubt about that. That's
Mike,
conversation.
thoughts, reactions?
To your science thing, I mean, I don't have anything on, Team Rubicon's been studied scientifically, but I sat in our national leadership conference in October, so we had about 160 people in there. Our volunteer leaders are in the room, and people were just sort of standing up, and there were 3 people that stood up in that room and said, the gun was on the table. Sorry, I'm emotional. And, man, sorry.
So you know that it made
they said the gun was on the table and
impact.
TR saved my life.
Yeah.
And that's what they said. And I'm, so you can study it, but I saw it. And to me, like, that gets me up in the morning.
How do people find out more about, are you on the web? Is it Team Rubicon USA.org? Okay. Sally, thoughts?
Yeah, so...
Because you have a methodology in the screening, right?
We do, and actually the whole world of suicide prevention, the research around it is still in its infancy. It's one of the last things to come to the table, but one of the things we found out is really a public health approach. It's a complex issue. So to have one solution and have some simple science around how to solve it, it's never going to happen. But what we're finding is with a comprehensive public health approach that looks at upstream prevention, where we're building resiliency in communities and mental health literacy, where we have intervention things that really work. Just like any other health issue, the earlier we can identify people and link them to qualified resources. And then in the moment of the crisis, what are we doing so that treatment doesn't feel like punishment, as it often does in our culture right now? People who are in crisis around mental health are often, cuffed and stuffed and held in isolation in emergency rooms for hours. It feels like punishment. No wonder nobody wants to do that. So what we find is when we have a very proactive public health approach, suicide rates go down. So
I should also say it's punishment also can be career killers. Yeah. If you're still in the military, it still is a career killer. Chaplains used to be safe, not clear. If you're in the position of trying to get help, the first question you ask is, who can we see outside the Army or Marine Corps?
I mean, mental health just broadly is why I asked you that first question. Mental health broadly is such, the more you dig into it, is such a huge tectonic problem in the country that very few people want to talk about or admit, right? So you get, for your biggest problem that nobody wants to admit, it creates tension across the board. It's one of the reasons why I support this mental health first aid activity, because it basically gets a lot more people densely spread through society who know something about it, So let me go to this lady. We're going to go to YouTube, but we're going to go to her first because she's been so patient. But yes, 30-second zingers. Go ahead.
Okay. Joan Michelson, Green Connections Media. Thank you. This is really interesting. First of all, when I say thank you for your service, I mean it. There's no residual guilt or anything in there. And I'm sure there's a lot of people in this room who feel the same way. Second of all, brain structure, it's not just about suicide. It's about violent tendencies, et cetera. In fact, Charlie Rose did a really interesting episode on this with a bunch of people who specialize in the brain structure. And I'd be interested to hear more about the brain structure and mental illness in general, that there are people who are actually susceptible based on their brain structure that they've taken apart.
Okay.
And a creative resource is Theater of War. I worked with Brigadier General Laurie Sutton, who was the first head of the National Center for Traumatic Brain Injury and Psychological Health. And they developed a program, Theater of War, you'll love this, Steve, where they had actors from HBO and movies come in and do 30 minutes of Aristotle and Sophocles, just reading from a book.
I would enjoy that. I don't know if this room would like Aristotle.
Right, and
and
then well, it's an Aspen thing. But anyway, and then 30 minutes of discussion among the health, it was on a base.
Right.
30 minutes of discussion among the mental health and clergy on the base.
Right.
And the CO leaves, by the way. The CO introduces it.
So short form.
And then 30 minutes of the audience contributing. And what happens is they use that performance as a trigger and a safe place to talk about what their experience is. So that it's not just about suicide, it's about getting to all the underbelly stuff before you get there. So if you can address, it seems to be focused on suicide. So if you can address the
I've been about 4 or 5 of those Theater of War, and I
do they work?
Oh, they do. They're safe texts. I'm also an ancient philosopher, so Ajax and Philoctetes are the best. Sophocles was a general. Those were reentry rituals. 15,000 in an amphitheater. They served and they didn't serve, and they're watching Ajax take his life on stage. It's unbelievable. Those are the first moments where you can get someone talking about suicide in front of, with generals and colonels often in the room. It's unbelievable. Also, another one, a little plug, Aquila Theater at NYU. They actually hire veterans to do ancient Greek tragedy. I mean, ancient Greek tragedy is one of our best.
Do a deal here.
Let's all act. Let's kind of
some
get
actors in Rubicon. I mean, Rubicon kind of fits as well, right?
Yeah, crossing.
Yes, right here in the middle. My friend with the great hat.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Sammy Ellis, Whiting International. I'm very interested in 2 points that came up. Your research, how many, I need to just get a figure or something as to how many minorities and women came into play for you to arrive at that particular conclusion as to who is most affected. And secondly, just here in Washington as an example, you can walk out of this building, and if you walk 2 blocks, you're going to encounter someone who is homeless, who's come back from the Iraqi encounters or going back to Vietnam. They're homeless, they're either in shelters, they can't find a job, they can't get their veterans benefits that they've been promised by this country. Where do you see this going with all of that so-called mushy whatever? It's not affecting people that it should be affecting. And we thank Congress because most of them haven't gone anywhere, and their children will be the last to go after they send us to war.
Quick thoughts, quick comments, and then we're doing Fitbit.
All right, for the last 20 years.
I am so excited.
The majority of people die.
James is here, and I'm ready.
You're going to run? You're going to start running?
Yeah, you're going to.
Men outpace women for suicide death like 3 to 1 consistently for the last 2 decades.
Right.
That does not mean that other communities are not affected by suicide. We know women attempt more. We know Latina teens attempt at really high rates. So many communities are affected by this. As part of the National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention, we have dedicated ourselves to bringing the suicide rate down. And if we're going to do that, we have to address the communities that are dying. That doesn't mean that the other communities aren't needing help. And then just to address your question about upstream stuff, one of the things that we're trying to encourage along with Mental Health First Aid and a number of other initiatives is to have earlier conversations when you start seeing symptoms emerging of agitation or distress or despondency. How do you start the conversation with someone? How do you say, I'm noticing things are changing and I'm worrying about you? And so we're trying to educate communities on how to do that so we don't have to wait until things are catastrophic before we intervene.
I just want to pick up on your point. Yeah, my count, I may be off 20 or so persons in the House and Senate have served. Very small. That means there's not a lot of buy-in or firsthand feeling about it. I think that is a big problem. And
that was a big theme, if I may, of James Fallow's cover story for us in the Atlantic.
He hit it on the head.
About the disconnect between those who were serving and those who were making the commitments. And you know, however you begin to sew that together, I think what's really interesting about Mike's program is it's sewing people back into communities. Communities are feeling the impact. Building those bonds are tremendously. And Jim Fallows is arguing that it is systemically broken right now and that it needs to be rebuilt. So, Mike?
My last, just jump on the soapbox. When I talk to people and they're not really sure how to help, who they should support, look at organizations and entities that are giving veterans and their families a reason to get up in the morning every day on a continuous basis. Not to go to get 50% off on tickets and to be put on a Jumbotron. Veterans don't like that. Families don't need that. They need to be able to get up in the morning, have a reason, have a purpose. Do they have access to health care? Do they have access to education? And do they have employment opportunities? Really, those three are where I tell people to try to focus.
Well, thank all three of you for sharing this slice of America's big mental health challenges. You've been wonderful. Please thank Mike Monroe of Team Rubicon at teamrubiconusa.org. Nancy Sherman from Georgetown, and author of the forthcoming Afterwar, Healing the Moral Wounds of Soldiers, and Sally Spencer Thomas, CEO and co-founder of the Carson Spencer Foundation. So thank you all. Thanks very much. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, man. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Okay. This is the next fun part. Stay where you're at. We're going to have fun. Go ahead,
Thank you.
Margaret.
Thank you, Mike, Nancy, Sally, Steve.